Welcome to EFT Nation, your home for all things tapping. For show notes and resources, please visit EFTtappingtraining.com. We are your tapping hosts. I'm Alina Frank.
And I'm Craig Wiener. The information provided in this podcast is not a substitute for counseling or medical advice. The information presented here is meant to inspire and educate listeners, but are not guarantees of any kind.
Today we're going to be discussing ACEs and PCEs and ACEs, so PACEs. So it's ACE, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, PCEs, which stands for Positive Childhood Experiences, and the combination of both, which is PACEs, P-A-C-E, Positive and Adverse Childhood Experiences. So I think a lot of people, especially those that have trained with us or mentored with us or have taken trauma classes with us, understand or have at least heard of ACEs. But I think for a lot of people, the PACEs thing is kind of new.
Yeah. I mean, it's not brand new in the literature, but I don't think it's gotten the kind of wide distribution of knowledge
Right.
as the ACEs. And, it's been my experience that most of the people listening here are people pretty involved in EFT, know a lot about EFT, practitioners of EFT, aficionados. And so most of you have probably heard of ACEs, but not everybody. So we're going to cover and kind of give you an overview of everything. What I want to say up front is that we're going to kind of start off from a more meta, lofty perspective about things. And then by the end, we'll get actually into the questions that they are. So that would be a trigger warning, right? If you don't want to hear those, or if you need to tap during that, or at any point, take care of yourself, right? And I also want to say that you don't have to scribble, because we'll be giving you a link to be able to take your own.
Well, it's going to be in the show notes.
In the show notes.
In the show
there
notes.
You go. Okay, great. Okay. So let's talk a little bit. The adverse childhood experiences studies, they began back with a guy named Dr. Vincent Felitti, and then from Kaiser, and then when he collaborated with Dr. Anda from the CDC, they combined to create the largest ACEs study. But it really began very simply out of an obesity study in which Dr. Felitti found that a lot of people that were very successful and dropping a lot of weight, especially a lot of women, when he started to try to understand why, it's what started to come up for them emotionally and overwhelmingly when they started to lose a lot of weight, get a lot of unwanted attention and comments, and started to find and explore that connection between early trauma, in those cases early sexual trauma, and weight-related issues, and how the connection between emotional and psychological adversity and physical outcomes. And so this has been studied, around the world, so many universities and so many nations, that this is probably the strongest tie-in between what happens to us, what we experience, and how that shows up in behaviors, in mental health conditions, and physical health conditions. I mean, they started to find correlations between these early childhood adverse experiences and heart disease, depression, violence, being a victim of violence, suicide. And this is really ubiquitous because, when they did that original study of like 17,000, almost 90% of people had at least one of these experiences that we'll go into.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the real problem starts to happen when you start to have higher and higher number ACE score from 0 to 10. 4 or more starts to really get pretty significant. I mean, you're looking at correlations of like the chance of having chronic pulmonary lung disease increases almost 400% when you've got an ACE score of 4 or higher. You've got hepatitis increases linked by almost 250%, depression by close to 500%, attempted suicide by 1,200%. So there's just like all of these behaviors and predilections and chronic mental and physical health conditions, the higher our ACE scores are. Now, we'll talk about those more, but the real balance that more and more research is being done on is how are those mitigated, how are those balanced by the positive things that happened when we were children.
Right. So we used to tell those that were looking at going through certification with us, our students practicing with the general public, or even a certified practitioner, you really do need to know, like, what's within my scope of practice? And this was just one of the ways, the ACEs was just one of the ways to determine, yes, you fall within my scope of practice. I can do EFT with you as an unlicensed mental health care professional and still stay, within my boundaries, right? But as more awareness became available about the impact of positive experiences, then it really is for the practitioner to assess both, to look at the whole picture.
Yeah. I mean, when you start to have more and more of those positive childhood experiences, it offers some protection against that adversity. I was just reading a report that a New Jersey government resilience commission was really looking more to focus upon the PCEs, right? So than the ACEs, because of how important they are, but really both of them, the combination is important, because when we start to have higher and higher positive childhood experience scores, then you're less likely to experience the things like depression. You're more likely to seek out social, emotional support. And so, in one study, the PCEs were shown to compensate for the ACEs' negative impact on physical and mental health, so that health risks that were neutralized for ACE scores that were 4 or less, and they were certainly decreased for higher ACE scores. Mm-hmm. So we have to look at the balance. While we may have been born into families that had a lot of adversity, mm-hmm. there might have also been a lot of love and support, and it might have only been one family member and not everybody. So we have this balance that we're looking to try to understand that can help provide, as Alina was saying, some clarity on, is this person within my scope? Maybe they have an ACE score of 4, but they have a PCE score of 3, which really is a very different than somebody having a ACE score of 4 or 5 and 0 PCEs. Right. So those are two very different experiences.
I want to say that this is just one of the ways that we would evaluate this, right?
Absolutely.
So what people come in to work on, all of those things, your goal setting, all of that comes into play when deciding whether it's a right fit for a practitioner to work with a client.
Mm. When we go over the questions and we start to dive into that, I also want to say that the original ACE study, mm-hmm. and many of them continued afterwards with an exploration of 10 questions, of 10 different types of experiences. But there's certainly not only 10.
Right.
And so there have been other studies or questionnaires that have gone what are often called beyond the 10, that are more societal and community and intergenerational. And when we go into that, that'll make more sense. But please don't think that the 10 questions we ask are the only 10 types of adversity that somebody can experience. Mm-hmm. It also doesn't include, this questionnaire, adult adversity.
Right.
Adult traumas that have happened. They're just of a different nature, and there would be many that would point to the neurowiring that's happening and the foundational learning that's happening about self and the world and perception when one is young, which is different than one may have more resilience and more experience and more wisdom and more mm-hmm. support as an adult than they did as a child.
Yep.
Okay. So another thing we were talking about before was, as a practitioner, mm-hmm. How do you talk about these things? How do you ask about them? When do you do that?
Right. If it becomes apparent, or you have some sense as a practitioner that you need to ask these questions. For example, if someone says, they make reference to, my childhood was a mess. I know all my problems come from my childhood. Those kinds of things make me want to ask the questions. And then when asking the questions, you've got to be very sensitive and not get into the story, because each of these questions could people want to explain. They want to not feel the shame of admitting that they have to answer yes to the question, and so there'll be explanation, which then runs the risk of having your potential client or your client dysregulated. So when asking the questions as a practitioner, you have to gently tell your client, do lots of pre-framing and say, look, this is just, I want you to do the best you can. My priority is to keep you safe. Do your best and just say yes or no. I really don't want any more than that. answer as best you can, yes or no.
Okay. So, in the 10 ACEs questions, 5 of those questions are personal, right? They have to do with things like physical abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect. 5 questions are related to other family members, like a parent who's an alcoholic, a mother who's been a victim of domestic violence, a family member that's in jail, a family member that has mental illness, the experience of divorce of parents. And so when you do an ACE test, each of the yeses of the 10 questions counts for 1 point. So your score is going to be 0 to 10, right? When we do the PCEs, it'll be 0 to 7.
Okay.
So, do you want to go through those questions?
Sure.
Okay. So, always begin with, prior to your 18th birthday, question 1 is, did a parent or another adult in the household often or very often, not just once in a while or one time, swear at you or insult you or put you down or humiliate you or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? So that's a yes or no question. Number 2.
Did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured?
Answer no or yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Number 3, did an adult or person that was at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you or have you touch their body in a sexual way, or even attempt to actually have oral, anal, vaginal intercourse? So sexual trauma question, yes or no.
Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Again, yes or no.
Did you often or very often feel that, again, before the age of 18, that you didn't have enough to eat, or you had to wear dirty clothes, and that you had nobody to protect you? Or maybe your parents were too drunk or too high to take care of you, or to take you to the doctor if you needed it? Yes or no.
Were your parents ever separated or divorced? Give yourself a 1 if the answer is yes.
Okay. Was your mother or your stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, had something thrown at her, or sometimes, often or very often, kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes, or threatened with a gun or knife? Again, 0 for no, 1 for yes.
Did you ever live with anyone who was a problem drinker or an alcoholic, or who used street drugs? Give yourself a 1 if the answer is yes.
Was a household member, when you grew up under 18, depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member ever attempt suicide? Again, give yourself a yes, a 1 if the answer is yes.
Did a household member go to prison? Give yourself a 1 if the answer is yes. And now you tally up the yeses, which you gave yourself 1 point for, and that is your ACE score.
Okay.
Let's go to the positive.
Okay. Now, when we go to the positive childhood experiences, the PCEs, a good definition that's used is protective and compensatory encounters that help to increase resilience and shield against the risk for a mental and physical illness. They're the good things that happened. Often, right alongside adversity that happened, it is, our lived experience, the good and the bad, become our biology and our physiology. So when you explore positive childhood experiences, the PCEs, have the person answer the following, or you yourself answer the following questions. And I started to explore some of the research actually breaks it down, not just to yes or no, but to varying degrees of, for example, never, rarely, sometimes, usually, always. But other questionnaires I've seen were yes or no, so it's in process of who's doing it and what study is exploring it. So for right now, we're going to go with a yes or no to give yourself a simple 0 or 1 per question. So during your childhood, before the age of 18, did you feel, number one, did you feel able to talk to your family about your feelings?
So give yourself a 1 for yes.
Mm-hmm.
Were you feeling that did you have a feeling that your family stood by you during difficult times? If the answer is yes, give yourself a 1.
3, did you enjoy participating in community traditions?
The answer is yes, give yourself a 1.
Yep.
Did you feel a sense of belonging in high school? If the answer is yes, give yourself a 1.
Okay, number 5. Did you feel supported by friends?
If the answer is yes, give yourself a 1. Have you had at least 2 non-parent adults who took genuine interest in you? If the answer is yes, give yourself a 1.
And number 7, did you feel safe and protected by an adult in your home?
The answer is yes, give yourself a 1. Okay, and so now the combination, which we call PACEs, would be you subtract the positive total from the negative total.
Or if you were very fortunate, you subtract the ACEs from the PACEs. I mean, in other words, it's the combination of the two.
Yeah, the difference.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously one is balancing out the other.
Right.
And that hopefully gives you a fuller look at these childhood experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Great website connection is the PACEs connection.
PACEs connection?
PACEs connection.
And also ACEs too high.
And that's another one.
Yep. Yep.
And so it really is, I just want to say, the most research method for understanding how what we've lived through, our lived experiences, affect our mental and physical physiology, and let alone behaviors, let alone health, and so many things. So, the thing that I even look at now is when somebody has chronic back pain, when they have heart disease, when they have pretty much any physical condition, what role might their childhood experiences have played in that physical outcome? And that's not without research that points to that possibility.
Sure.
So, and I wanted to say, resilience really speaks to the ability to overcome what we've experienced. And EFT, boy, does it go a long way in starting to heal the long-term effects of what we have experienced.
Thanks for joining us today at EFT Nation. And remember that you can find show notes and previous episodes at EFTtappingtraining.com.